Do you ever think about the minimum wage? Have you ever sat down and thought, I wonder what the highest minimum wage in the country is? Good news, I'm going to tell you. Since July of 2009, the federal minimum wage for workers has been $7.25, but many states, cities, and counties, and small towns have their own minimum wage above the federal minimum wage, meaning the minimum wage for the federal thing is the lowest you can go. It's like the federal government says, we know you'd like to have indentured servants, but you know what? We're going to make you pay them a little bit. Most states do have a minimum wage that is above the federal minimum wage. Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee don't have a state minimum wage. Instead, they follow the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. It should be no surprise those are 5 of the states with the highest poverty rate in the nation. If you're making federal minimum wage, and you're not like a high school student, 16, 17 years old, just working part-time, you are living in poverty. It's either that or you just use it as a cover to hide the fact you have a very successful OnlyFans channel. Today we're looking at the 10 states with the highest minimum wage. I'm also going to give you what the average rent in that state is, and it's for the whole state, so it's going to vary widely. One other interesting thing, I did find another study where they figured out how much you need to make hourly to afford the average 2-bedroom house in that state. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Colorado. Colorado is a state that, it's got a lot of areas where the cost of living isn't terrible, but you look at Denver and some of those ski resort towns, and the cost of living is brutal. So their minimum wage needs to be a little bit higher just to make sure people can afford the occasional Happy Meal. In 2006, Colorado State Legislature passed a policy declaring the state's minimum wage had to be raised to keep up with inflation. So in January of 2022, Denver's minimum wage rose to $15.87 for those who work more than 4 hours a week. But the statewide minimum wage is $12.56. The average rent in Colorado on a 2-bedroom apartment is $1,633. If you want to be able to afford a 2-bedroom rental home in Colorado, according to that other survey, you need to make $28.94 an hour. Now, if you're 2 people working, obviously you could get by with a lot less 2 incomes. This is just if you're 1 person. Number 9, Maine. That's right, the evergreen state comes in at number 9. Like I've pointed out many times on this channel, Maine is one of the safest states we have. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont are always the lowest crime rates in the nation. So you're safe and you get paid a little bit more than the other states. Side note, it's not the evergreen state. Evergreen state is Washington. Maine is the pine tree state. How many of you guys were leaving the message? Let me know in the comment section. One thing I've learned in the years of making these videos, Maine residents, they get pretty worked up if you misstep anything about that state. To afford rent on a 2-bedroom house in Maine, your average hourly wage would have to be $22.69. But the minimum wage in Maine is $12.75. The average rent on a 2-bedroom apartment is $1,534. Number 8, Oregon. Oregon's a little bit different when it comes to their minimum wage. They've adjusted it depending on where you are in the state, because the cost of living in the backwoods of any state is far below what it is in a city. So in Oregon, there's 3 different minimum wages. Just last month, in July of 2022, Oregon's standard minimum wage increased to $13.50. However, Portland workers earn $14.75 an hour, while workers in non-urban areas will earn $12.50. So what that breaks down to is the minimum wage in Oregon is the $12.75. The average rent on a 2-bedroom apartment is $1,364. And according to that other study, you need to make $27.65 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental home. Now that's all averages throughout this video, and it could be drastically different if you're living in a city versus a rural area or a small town. Please keep that in mind. Number 7, Arizona. Surprise, surprise, Arizona's on this list. Yeah, that doesn't make sense if you're just going off Arizona's reputation. Until the last couple years, they've been kind of known as a red state, and red states tend to not want to raise their minimum wage too much. Not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm not taking a political stance at all. I'm just telling you how things normally work out. In January of 2022, they raised the minimum wage in Arizona from $12.15 an hour to $12.80 an hour. They do have some exemptions from that, and those include people working for their parents or siblings, casual babysitters, they call it, people employed by Arizona state and federal government, and those employed by small businesses with less than $500,000 in annual revenue. So they got some little ins and outs there. But the minimum wage in Arizona, like I said, is $12.80 an hour. The average rent in Arizona for a 2-bedroom apartment is $1,613. And that other study, which was done by the National Low Income Housing Coalition, they say in Arizona, you need to make $23.44 to afford a 2-bedroom rental house. Number 6, New Jersey. New Jersey is a pretty expensive place to live in most of the state, so you need a pretty high minimum wage so you don't have half your population living in a van down by the river. Besides having a fairly high cost of living and housing prices, you get taxed up the yazoo here. And I mean yazoo in the nicest possible way. The minimum wage in New Jersey is $13, but most wage earners in New Jersey are eligible for that minimum wage, but there are some exceptions. Seasonal workers and employees who work for small employers with fewer than 6 workers will earn $1.10 less. The state right now is working towards getting it up to $15 an hour. The average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in New Jersey is $1,783. What you need to make to afford a 2-bedroom house rental here is $31.32. That's brutal. Now that's for one single person. If there's 2 people, obviously you could probably swing it for a lot less hourly. Number 5, Connecticut. Connecticut is a very strange state for so many different reasons. Like I've said in other videos, they've got some of the richest neighborhoods and towns in the nation while having some of the most rundown cities at the same time. They're not really knocking it out of the park when it comes to minimum wage, but their minimum wage up until this summer was $13 an hour. They just raised it to $14 an hour. The average rent in Connecticut is $1,533 on a 2-bedroom apartment. The study by the National Low Income Housing Coalition says that in Connecticut, you need $27.80 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom house. Number 4, New York State. The Empire State shows up at number 4. Now we're talking about the entire state, so I've said in other videos that New York City really changes the averages of the entire state because it is so frickin' expensive. The statewide minimum wage is $13.20. Now, it's a little bit different. New York's minimum wage is higher in Westchester County and Long Island, which it's $15 there. The rest of the state is $13.20, and it's expected to increase yearly until they eventually get it up to $15. And of course, by the time they get it up to $15 in a few years, $15 has the spending power of $13.20 does now. Now, New York City, realistically, if you want to live there and get by, you need to make at least $25 an hour. Now, the NLIHC study found that in New York, you need to make at least $37.72 to afford a 2-bedroom rental home here. But they get the 4th spot on this list because their minimum wage currently is $13.20 statewide, and their average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $1,695. Like I said, that's a different story in New York City. $5,000 might get you a broom closet above a fish market that hasn't paid for trash pickup in 3 months. Number 3, California. The Golden State slides in at number 3, and I can tell you right now, it is nowhere near what you need to survive in almost every part of this state. Forget the most expensive parts, which are near the coast. Workers in California at small businesses with 25 or fewer employees currently earn $14 an hour. For workers at businesses with 26 or more employees, the minimum wage is $15 an hour. All workers, regardless of the size of the company, are going to be earning $15.50 an hour as of January 1st, 2023. Now, that was just announced in May of 2022. Prior to that, it was going to go up to $15. But like I said, currently it is $14 an hour, minimum wage California. The average rent on a 2-bedroom apartment is $2,032. When we look at that other study, a 2-bedroom house, to afford that, you need to make $39 an hour. Brutal. And we still got 2 states to go. Number 2, Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a very expensive state, and everybody knows that. Boston is one of the more expensive cities in the nation. According to state policy, Massachusetts minimum wage has to be at least 50 cents more than the federal minimum wage. And when it got frozen at $7.25 an hour, they just had to keep going. Currently, the state plan is to get to $15 an hour in 2023. Massachusetts increased the minimum wage in 2022 from $13.50 to $14.25, and that's where it sits right now. The average rent on a 2-bedroom apartment in Massachusetts is $1,762. Now, Boston is a different story. You're looking at $24,000, $25,000, $3,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Oh, and it goes way up. If you want to afford a 2-bedroom house in Massachusetts, according to the other study, to be able to afford that, you need to make $37.97 an hour. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. That is a channel that is growing, and we're donating to classrooms across the country. So we would love it if you helped out, went over, subscribed, maybe watch some videos. There's a link down below. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Washington State. That's right, we finally get to the real evergreen state, Washington. Washington is an expensive place to live. If you cut Seattle, Tacoma out of that equation, it's actually kind of affordable. One good thing about the cost of living in Washington, they don't have a state income tax, so it could be so much worse. If you're living in California and you're looking to, let's say, retire to the Pacific Northwest, give Washington a look before you look at Oregon. That no state income tax thing really helps out your pension, retirement, whatever. Now, Washington has had the highest minimum wage for the last few years. In fact, Seattle passed legislation that would raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour by 2021. As of January 22nd, the minimum wage has increased in the city even further. It's now $17.27 an hour. That's just in Seattle. Now, some of the other cities in Washington do have it at $16 an hour currently. The city of SeaTac, which is in between Seattle and Tacoma, SeaTac, Seattle, Tacoma, get it? Anyway, their minimum wage is $17.54 for employers in the hospitality and transportation industry. So it's a little weird law that gets you a little extra money. But overall, or I should say the state average for minimum wage is $14.49 currently. The average 2-bedroom apartment rent in the state of Washington currently is $1,694. If you want to rent a 2-bedroom house in the state of Washington, you need to make $31.33 to be able to afford that. Now, those are big time averages, so don't get all caught up in the numbers. Just kind of compare them to each other, and that kind of tells you where these places stand. On the other side of that coin, the absolute cheapest place is Arkansas, and to be able to afford a 2-bedroom rental home in Arkansas, you need to make $14.89. West Virginia is not much better, $15.38, and Mississippi is $15.67. All right, everyone, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, and be nice to each other.